Just very quickly as we begin, I'm just going to turn it over to Jillian Wipfler, and she is going to introduce somebody who's very special to her and someone I share a lot of common interest in, who we're both in the ministry. So, Jillian?
The Reverend William Wipfler was born, raised, and educated in New York City. He and his wife Pauline served 9 years as Episcopal missionaries in the Dominican Republic, where their 4 children were born, and then 3 years in Costa Rica. In 1967, he was appointed Director for Latin America and the Caribbean of the National Council of Churches. In 1977, he developed and became the first director of the Council's Human Rights Office for 11 years. He was the founder of the Washington Office on Latin America and was also elected to the board of directors of the Center for Constitutional Rights. For 12 years, he served on the board of Amnesty International USA, was vice chairperson and a member of its advisory council. He later served as human rights and international justice advisor to the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church and to the Anglican office at the United Nations. In addition to his PhD and master's degree in history, Rev. Wipfler was awarded an honorary doctorate for his work in human rights. Dr. Wipfler also earned a second master's degree in political science and a third master's degree in theology. He originally received a BA in English literature. In 1991, he took early retirement in order to be the principal caregiver for his wife, Pauline, a victim of early onset Alzheimer's disease. However, he has said that the most important role he plays now is Poppy, a joking grandfather to his 12 children. I am his favorite, at least for today, and I am proud to introduce Reverend William Wipfler, my Poppy.
I always warn audiences that applaud when I'm introduced that they may be sorry they applauded at the beginning. I'd like to thank the headmaster, Mr. McMullen, and especially Reverend Robert Ganung for making arrangements for me to be here today. The first time I saw the musical Les Miserables was 25 years ago in London with the original cast. Second time was on Broadway, and the third time was in Toronto with a traveling cast. The fourth and fifth times were here just under a month ago. Every production was different, each one was moving, and all of them exhilarating. But what I experienced here at Taft was unique. It was one of quality and of generous gift and contribution. For me, it was particularly stunning that those who participated in any way had dedicated a gift of their time in spite of academic and other requirements, of talents, and they were indeed impressive, and passion, which was the supreme ingredient of this set of performances of Les Miserables. I'd like to ask a favor. Would everyone directly involved in the production please stand? Mr. Doyle, I see hiding in the back. The cast and chorus, the production people, stage crew. Hold, wait. The orchestra, the publicists, anybody at all, other faculty who may have been involved, just all stand at once. Okay, don't stand. But I want to offer you my thanks. That was a wonderful experience for me. I must say that you gave a gift to whoever saw it, And I hope that all of you who were involved in some way felt that you gifted yourselves. That's a terribly important part of any performance. My actual introduction to Les Miserables was in May of 1950. I had to register for my courses for the following fall semester at Adelphi University, and there was one called The Classics. At registration, we received the course curriculum, and there was a little note pinned to it with a warning that said something like, go to the library, check out a copy of one of the books reserved for this class, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Read it during the summer. When I went to the library, I was given a hardcover volume of 1,488 pages. No, I didn't remember that number. I looked up on the internet last week to find out what that particular edition was. And it even had a carrying case so I wouldn't break the binding. The librarian informed me that I should start it soon because it contained approximately 531,000 words, which I did remember because I was born in May 1931, 531. And so in looking at the internet last week, also I discovered Les Miserables is the 15th longest book ever published. It was indeed a heavy book, but not only in the sense of its physical weight. I graduated as a physics major from Brooklyn Technical High School, and I had only received a minimum amount of education in literature, history, philosophy, foreign languages. I knew nothing about France in the mid-1800s, nor the condition of its peoples, its disastrous social stratification, its enormous debts, its many wars, its violent revolutions. Nothing. I certainly had no idea why such a monstrosity was put in my hands to be read and to ruin my summer. In the few weeks that remained before summer vacation started, I turned to our source of research in those years, the Encyclopedia Britannica. And the description in the encyclopedia kind of stirred up my appetite to get into the book. I discovered that the French title was used for the English edition, and that's not usual, as you know, Les Miserables, because no one word could actually define that word in English. There was no one word in English. It could mean the wretched. It could mean the victims, the outcasts, the impoverished, the marginalized, the downtrodden, the hopeless. In other words, all those who were physically, socially, and spiritually miserable. But surprise, Les Miserables was also a term that was used to account for the scoundrel, the cheat, the corrupt, and the cruel, of whom there were many in mid-1800 France. Those were the persons who were ethically and morally miserable. So a large number of the persona of Les Miserables are embraced by the title, not solely those who we think of in terms of the poor, the impoverished, and so on. Finding the correct term is often the hardest job for the translator. Hugo was born in 1802, 13 years after the French Revolution, and a son of the general of Napoleon Bonaparte. And during his 83 years of life, he changed his politics. I know none of you and none of your parents ever changed their politics, but he changed his politics as governments changed in France But the one thing that remained constant for Victor Hugo was his concern and commitment to human rights on behalf of the victims of corrupt power and wealth. That never wavered. The book was written over many years, and interestingly was actually published when he was in exile on the British island of Guernsey. He had insulted the president of France, Louis Napoleon, because he had taken power by a coup d'etat, and so Hugo had to leave for his own health, and his great novel was published at the same time in 7 different cities across Europe. Now, that summer that I read Les Miserables, I worked as a senior counselor in a youth camp owned and directed by the superintendent of schools from a very affluent community in Long Island. His goal was to provide 2 months of living and learning experiences for equal numbers of young people from his school district and also from some of the most underprivileged sections of the 5 boroughs of New York City. When he saw my book, he smiled and he told me it was his favorite. He commented he would give me time to do a little reading. And he said, if you are reading it while you are here, it may help you understand what we are attempting to do with this unusual mix of teenagers, rich and poor, well-educated and almost uneducated, cultural and socially inept, Black, Italian, Irish, Chinese, Russian, Puerto Rican, and more, and each of them all American. It will be a difficult summer, and it was. Some of the teenagers, mostly the kids from the city, were terribly insecure. During the first weeks, their primary response to questions, discussions, even entertainment, was silence. It was like the tragic perspective of that first chorus of The Prisoners that opens the musical. Look down, don't look them in the eye. Look down, you're here until you die. Look down, you'll always be a slave. Look down, you're standing in your grave. These young people have been conditioned by abuse from their neighbors, from the police, from teachers, and even from their parents. The slums were their prison. Silence was their security. And on the other extreme, an extreme of insecurity, were those who were never silent or charitable. They didn't look on others very well. They were sure they knew and understood and fulfilled the rules. In fact, they reminded other campers and even the counselors what in their minds the rules should be. They were our Inspector Javert in residence, hardly ever listening, always dictating, never manifesting doubt about themselves or their opinions. They came from homes in which parents were powerful and infallible. And these young people were on the path to power and infallibility. They considered their position a right and perhaps a God-given gift. And yet they were deeply insecure. In the midst of both groups, between silence and arrogance, were those who were searching seriously to examine their own lives and their world. They were willing to place themselves in a very difficult spotlight. It was often threatening. Within discussions about who they were and where they were headed and what they wanted to be. And they cared enough to recognize and remove some of those barriers little by little during the first weeks to finally persuade the others, the silent and the arrogant, to come out of that, subdue those particular attitudes, and join them in a journey. I realized that, in a sense, that was the heart of Les Miserables. It is the story of the most important of the persons in Les Miserables, Jean Valjean. The novel is more harsh than the musical when you are first introduced to Valjean. I think that probably he is someone none of us could like very much. Self-centered, scheming, constantly tempted to violence, not an object of sympathy in the extreme sentence he's been given, even though he has been put in prison for many years for stealing bread for his sister's children. In the book, he is not someone with whom you want to sympathize. But in the book as well as in the play, it is the role of the bishop that makes the difference in his life. It shook this hard man, Jean Valjean, to the core about a transformation he could feel within himself. Why did I allow that man to touch my soul and teach me love? He treated me like any other. He gave me his trust. He called me brother. My life, he claims for God above, can such things be? Can such things be? I had come to hate this world which always hated me. Take an eye for an eye, turn your heart into stone. This is all I lived for and all I've known. One word from him, and I'd be back beneath the lash upon the rack. And instead, he offers me my freedom. What spirit came to move my life? That moment of trust and love of Jean Valjean found inspiration to recreate his life, and he experienced it in his love of Fantine, somebody he had thrown out into the streets, and then his willingness to accept Cosette, her daughter, as his own. Let me tell you that in that growing atmosphere of trust and affection that we were beginning to experience at the camp from that group in the center, the barriers began to fall down. There's a difference between, as you all know, hearing and listening. And one of the things that began to occur was that each of the young people began to listen and to hear the story of the others. They discussed openly and honestly how they felt about their schools, their communities, their families, their lives, each other. They were able to talk about the pain and the suffering of poverty, the injustices that many of them faced, the extravagance of lifestyle and lack of social responsibility that many of them felt in their own homes. And they took it a step further. Little by little, when their parents came to visit on weekends, the campers pushed their parents into conversation with the parents of their new friends. By the end of 2 months, they had exchanged addresses and telephone numbers. And in a follow-up gathering of counselors with the camp director, later, I think it was in November, the camp director informed us that a little organization had been created for meetings of the campers scheduled every 2 months that brought the director, the boys and their families, the boys and girls and their families together to maintain relationships and to talk about future. Now, I was 2/3 of the way through Les Miserables when the summer ended. And when we were leaving, the director asked me, "Did Les Miserables add anything to your experience this summer?" That's a tough question before you finish the book. But I assured him it did, and he handed me a typewritten letter and commented, "This is what Victor Hugo thought about his own book." I read it when I was going home on the bus, and I found a copy of it, thanks to the internet. It was written by the publisher of the Italian translation. Listen to it carefully. It mentions the United States only once, but I think that it also speaks to each of us. This is Victor Hugo writing. "You are right, sir, when you tell me that Les Miserables is written for all nations. I do not know whether it will be read by all, but I wrote it for all. It is addressed to England as well as to Spain, to Italy as well as to France, to Germany as well as to Ireland, to republics like the United States, which have slaves, as well as to empires like Russia, which have serfs. Social problems overstep frontiers. The sores of the human race, those great sores which cover the globe, do not halt at red or blue lines traced upon a map. Like us, you have prejudices, superstitions, tyrannies, fanaticisms, blind laws lending assistance to ignorant customs. This book, Les Miserables, is no less your mirror than ours. Certain men, certain classes rise in revolt against this book, and I understand that. Mirrors, those revealers of the truth, are hated by many. That does not prevent them from being of use. As for myself, I have written for all, with a profound love of my own country, but without being engrossed by France more than by any other nation. In proportion as I advance in life, I grow more simple, and I become more and more patriotic for all of humanity. In every place where man is ignorant and despairing, in every place where woman is sold for bread, wherever the child suffers for lack of the book, which should instruct him, and of a home which should warm him, the book of Les Miserables knocks at the door and says, "Open to me, I come for you." I was very fortunate to find a copy of that letter in preparation for this morning and in thinking about Les Miserables. And I thought of the song that those of you who were on the stage sang at the end of the musical, and I think it reflects powerfully Victor Hugo's hopes for the future of humanity. And when I say that, I am talking about your future, the future of all of my grandchildren, and the future of your friends who do not have the privilege of attending Taft School. The future. Let me remind you of what you sang standing here. Do you hear the people sing, lost in the valley of the night? It is the music of a people who are climbing to the light, who are for the wretched of the earth. There is a flame that never dies. Even the darkest night will end and the sun will rise. They will live again in freedom. In the garden of the Lord they will walk behind the plowshare. They will put away the sword. The chain will be broken and all men will have their reward. Will you join the hard question? Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me somewhere beyond the barricade? Is there a world you long to see? It's a personal question to everyone. Is there a world you long to see? Do you hear the people sing? Say, do you hear the distant drums? It is the future that they bring when tomorrow comes. Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me somewhere beyond the barricade? Is there a world you long to see? Take that question with you. I hope that was sung with the marvelous energy and conviction that I witnessed, not just because it was part of the script, but because in its words, you who participated and you who listened heard truth and the profound spirit of Les Miserables. I hope it may be sung always at Taft School, and more important, that it will be lived by you and by those who follow you. And I'm going to make sure that it is lived by my granddaughter. Thank you.